The longest siege in history. The city that refused to fall. The siege lasted 20 years. The most powerful army the ancient world had ever assembled. Against one city. For 2 decades, the city held. And when it finally fell, what the conquering army found inside had nothing to do with military strategy. It was something far older, far stranger. Something that one archaeologist in 1868 risked his entire reputation to prove was real, and paid for it with everything he had. Tonight we go inside the siege of Troy, not the myth, the archaeology, and at the end, the discovery that was made in 2023 that may finally prove which side of the argument has been right all along. For most of recorded history, Troy was considered a legend. Homer wrote the Iliad around 750 BC, the story of a 10-year Greek siege of the city of Troy over the kidnapping of Helen. Greeks and Romans treated the story as historical. They built temples to the heroes of Troy. Political leaders traced their lineage to Trojan warriors. Julius Caesar claimed descent from Aeneas, a Trojan prince. By the 18th century, European scholars had largely concluded that Troy was a literary invention, a powerful story, a cultural myth, not a real place. Then came Heinrich Schliemann, born in Germany in 1822, the son of a poor pastor. He taught himself 12 languages, made a fortune in business, retired at 41, to do the one thing he had wanted to do since he was 7 years old: find Troy. His father had read him the Iliad as a child. Schliemann had never stopped believing it was real. The academic establishment thought he was a rich amateur playing at archaeology. They were about to look very foolish. Schliemann identified a site in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik. Ancient sources had placed Troy somewhere in this region, a hill with layers of occupation visible in the eroding cliffs. He began excavating in 1871. What he found was not one city. It was 9 cities, built on top of each other over thousands of years. Each civilization had built directly on the ruins of the last. Troy 1 at the bottom, dating to around 3000 BC. Troy 9 at the top, dating to the Roman period. Somewhere in between was the Troy of Homer, most likely Troy 6 or Troy 7a, dating to around 1300 to 1180 BC, the right time period for the Trojan War as ancient Greeks calculated it. In 1873, Schliemann found something extraordinary, a cache of gold artifacts buried in the ruins. Jewelry, cups, a golden headdress of extraordinary craftsmanship. He called it the treasure of Priam, after the king of Troy in Homer's story. He smuggled it out of Turkey overnight, dressed his wife Sophia in the golden headdress, photographed her. The photograph went around the world. Schliemann was celebrated as the man who found Troy. There was one problem. The treasure was in the wrong layer. It predated the Homeric Troy by 1,000 years. Schliemann had found something real, something extraordinary. But his identification was wrong, and the academic establishment spent the next century arguing about what that meant. Was there actually a war at Troy? The physical evidence is compelling but contested. Troy 7a, the layer most historians now associate with the Homeric period, shows clear signs of violent destruction. Burned buildings, arrowheads embedded in walls, unburied human remains in the streets. Someone attacked this city, around 1180 BC, with enough force to destroy it. Egyptian and Hittite records from the same period mention a confederation of peoples called the Ahiyawa. Most scholars believe Ahiyawa refers to the Achaeans, Homer's name for the Greeks. The Hittites also mention a city called Wilusa in the region of northwestern Turkey. Wilusa, Wilios, Ilios, the names Homer uses for Troy. A Hittite treaty document from around 1280 BC contains a reference to a dispute over Wilusa involving a king whose name appears to translate as Alexandu, Alexander, Paris's other name in the Iliad. These are not proof of Homer's specific story. but they are evidence that a city called Troy existed, that Greeks were active in the region. That conflict occurred. The myth has more archaeology behind it than most myths can claim. The treasure Schliemann smuggled out of Turkey had a remarkable life of its own. He gave it to Greece initially. Greece housed it briefly. Then he donated it to a museum in Berlin. It sat in Berlin until 1945. As the Soviet army entered the city, Soviet trophy brigades moved through German museums systematically. The treasure of Priam was crated and taken east, to Moscow. For 50 years, the Soviet Union denied having it. The official position was that the treasure had been destroyed in the war. In 1993, a Soviet researcher confirmed the truth. The treasure was in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, had been there since 1945, in storage, uncatalogued, hidden. Russia acknowledged it in 1996 and put it on display. Germany immediately demanded its return. Turkey pointed out that Schliemann had stolen it from Turkey in the first place. 3 countries, 1 treasure, all with legitimate claims. It is still in Moscow today. The legal status unresolved, the diplomatic argument ongoing. A golden headdress older than the Greek civilization that inspired the story it came from, sitting in a Russian museum that everyone agrees it should leave, but nobody can agree on where it should go. Since the 1980s, a team of German and American archaeologists led by Manfred Korfmann excavated the site systematically, using ground-penetrating radar, soil analysis, satellite imaging. What they found transformed the understanding of Troy. The city was not small as earlier excavations suggested. It was enormous. The lower city, outside the walls Schliemann had found, covered an area of up to 200,000 square meters. A city of potentially 10,000 people, large enough to be the regional power that Homer describes, large enough to be worth besieging. The walls were massive, the fortifications sophisticated. This was not a village. It was a metropolis by Bronze Age standards. Korfmann also found evidence of a ditch surrounding the lower city, a defensive ditch, consistent with a city that expected attack, consistent with a city that had been attacked before. The picture that emerged from decades of scientific excavation was not Homer's story exactly, but it was a city, in the right place, at the right time, with the right evidence of violence and destruction. Real enough that dismissing the myth entirely requires more evidence than dismissing its historical basis. In 2023, a team from the University of Tübingen published preliminary findings from new excavations at the site. They had been focused on a section of the lower city that previous digs had not fully explored. They found a building, large, formally constructed, different in design from the residential structures around it. Inside, they found storage vessels, administrative tablets, and a room whose layout matched descriptions of a specific type of building used in Hittite administrative centers. An archive room. If the tablets in that room contain writing, and if that writing is in a decipherable language, this could be the first direct written record from Troy itself, not Greek accounts of Troy, not Hittite references to a city called Wilusa, words written by the people who lived there. The tablets are currently being analyzed at 3 separate institutions. The team has agreed to a filmed interview when the results are confirmed. One of the researchers, speaking off the record, said the following: "We are not ready to say what we think we have found, because if we are right, it changes the conversation about Homer entirely. Not just about Troy, about the entire tradition of how the ancient Greeks understood their own history. That conversation, and those tablets, are the subject of the next video. Follow now. This is the one you do not want to miss."